Did you know that Biden was impaired?
Yes. I could tell just based on things that I saw from a distance.
Right.
We lost my mother-in-law a few years ago to Alzheimer's. She had had the disease for nearly a decade. The doctors told us soon after she was diagnosed what sorts of things to watch for. And they said, you'll know that it's starting to get a lot worse when it starts to affect her posture and particularly her gait. When she starts shuffling, kicking her feet forward,
yes,
rather than walking in a fluid, smooth motion like she always has, you'll know that things are progressing quickly and that is an outward manifestation of what's going on inside of her mind. I saw that same gait and posture in President Biden during his first term in office. I don't remember exactly when it was in 2021 that I noticed that, but it was sometime during his first year. Now, obviously, there are other reasons why someone could have that happen,
for sure,
where it wouldn't necessarily be reflective of his cognitive decline. But then I saw plenty of reasons to believe there was cognitive decline happening as well.
Yes.
They kept him shielded not only from the public and from non-friendly press, but also from members of Congress. Now, remember, look, I've been in the Senate for 13 and a half years. I've served while we've had three different presidents. Obama, when Biden as his vice president, and then Trump, and now Biden as president. We have seen a lot more of other presidents. Trump was a lot more gregarious. He was a lot more willing and eager to engage with the rank and file members in Congress than Obama was, but Obama was still up on the Hill a fair amount. I mean, one time in particular, I remember walking in the basement of the Capitol. I was turning a corner and bumped right into President Obama. And we had a great little chat. Oh, Mike, good to see you. Let's talk soon about criminal justice reform. It was great. We'd run into him. He would call from time to time just to check in on things that we agreed on, projects that we were working on together. Trump, of course, was very active. Members of Congress could call him and get him on the phone very, very quickly. He was very engaging. With Biden, it hardly happens at all.
Really?
Like, they shielded him from us. In some ways, my wife, I think this was in maybe the first half or the first quarter of 2022, went over to an event at the White House for Senate spouses, hosted by the First Lady, who was herself a longtime member of the Senate Spouses Organization. And while they were there, President Biden just kind of came wandering in. I think they were in one of the ballrooms. Kind of came wandering in. She said there was no Secret Service with him, no staff with him. He just kind of walked in. She said instinctively, I just said, "Oh, hello, Mr. President. It's good to see you." He asked her, "Do you work in the East Wing?" And she said, No, Mr. President, I'm Sharon Lee, Senator Mike Lee's wife. He swore me into the Senate twice, first in 2011, then in 2017, just before he left the vice presidency. And we had interacted with him a lot, and she thought that would take care of it. He looked confused, and moments later, he said, "Do you work in the West Wing?" And he was not quite there. Moments later, someone came up to him, one of the other Senate spouses, I think it was a Democrat, and had a phone in her hand and said, "Hey, my brother-in-law is a big fan. It's his birthday. Will you say hi to him?" This is Biden's signature move. He's really, really good at this. I remember when I first came to the Senate, and he would have dinner and other gatherings with senators. He got Pat Toomey's dad on the phone when he found out he had lived in Scranton, and he was like, "How the hell are you? This is Joe Biden. I understand you're from Scranton." By the end of it, Pat Toomey's dad and then Vice President Biden felt like they were old fraternity brothers.
I knew Biden, and I remember exactly
Very
that.
good at this.
Oh, excellent.
But this woman handed him the phone. It rang. The woman's brother-in-law answered, "Hello." And then he got a confused look on his face, held out the phone, hung it up, and handed the phone back. Now that for Joe Biden
That's crazy.
is very significant. Very significant.
And this is sitting president of the United States.
Yes. And this was, I believe, a year and a half, perhaps a little more than 2 years ago. So we would see little snippets like this.
That's a big snippet.
And then we would see the clips on TV, which in some ways were worse. I'm still stunned that the media did everything that they could to minimize the significance of this, but still they were caught on camera. They were out there, and they just sort of didn't comment on it, as if we didn't say anything about it. It wasn't real.
That is an amazing story. So that was almost 3 years ago, you said. I mean, do senators, there are only 100 of you. You all know each other pretty well, I've noticed. Smallest club in Washington, which is a small city. Do people talk about this?
Yes. Republicans talk about it a lot, of course. When we talk about it with our Democratic colleagues, there will sometimes be nods and statements to the effect that, there are good days and bad days. And then they try to move on as soon as possible. They don't like to talk about it. I suppose I understand why they don't want to talk about it, but it's a thing that sometimes needs to be talked about.
Well, especially since we've got a couple wars going on that we're paying for.
That's right.
They're very high stakes.
That's right.
This moment. And
if you don't have someone at the top who is a sentient being, who understands what's at stake and can make real-time calculations after making an initial decision to say, withdraw from Afghanistan by September 11th of 2021. If in the days and weeks leading up to that, there are all sorts of sort of warning signs that might not be the best approach. By the way, why on earth would you tie the withdrawal to the anniversary of a terrorist attack against the United States? I think that's really bizarre. But there are all sorts of warning signs that making that deadline would itself cause problems. Now, I had been supportive for years of the idea of withdrawal. So
me too.
Was President Trump. And when President Trump was still in office, I talked to him about this a fair amount, and to his national security advisor, Robert O'Brien. And what they would tell me is, look, we've got a really good plan to do this. We think we can pull this off by maybe the first or second quarter of 2021, if he's reelected. There was some prep work that had to be done in the lead up to those months. And they weren't able to pull it off in 2020. But their plan involved making sure that there was not a single weapon that could fire left in the country. President Trump, I think, took it even further. He didn't want a single nail or a single screw left intact. That any gun that couldn't be exported would have to have its barrel melted down or exploded and rendered unusable. He wasn't going to leave any weaponry behind that could be usable by the enemy. But with Biden having made this arbitrary decision to withdraw by the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, he didn't back off. Now, why is that? He's the commander-in-chief, of course, but once he made that arbitrary decision, if he's not in full possession of his faculties, might that explain why he had this dogged determination to proceed with that, even though there were all kinds of warning signs flashing?
Well, given what we saw at the debate, and now adding to that, the story you just told about your wife's interactions with him at the White House, where he couldn't even talk on the phone. Who's running the government? Who has been running the government for the last 4 years? Who's running it now? He's still president, apparently.
Yeah. Look, what we don't know is how common those were. We saw so little of him, see so little of him, that it's hard to say whether those were to what degree those were aberrations. We all hoped and wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, sometimes he's got a lot on his mind, or he's tired, or whatever, and everybody has down moments. Maybe, just maybe, there are times when he's lucid, and those vastly outnumber those that aren't. Now, that seems to be contradicted by everything we saw during that same time period from clips from the public. But then again, he was sometimes giving speeches where he appeared to be sort of in control, not necessarily as sharp as he once was, but aware of his surroundings.
Those are all scripted.
Yes.
And so you're the constitutional scholar, so this is a question, not a statement, but my understanding is that under our system, the people rule, that's the fundamental point, and they rule through their elected representatives. And so the people who are elected have all the power because the people have all the power. I think that's the way it works.
Popular sovereignty.
Yeah. And so if unelected officials in say the executive branch are making all the meaningful decisions, that's illegal. That's unconstitutional, isn't it?
Yeah, especially considering the fact that the way the Constitution is set up, the President of the United States is the executive branch.
Yes.
With the exception of the Vice President, who has an independent status and set of responsibilities under the Constitution, but they're fairly narrow. The President of the United States, if we were operating in a manner truly consistent with the structure, text, original understanding of the Constitution, the President of the United States would be in charge of the entire executive branch, with the ability essentially to fire anyone for any reason or no reason at all. And so,
because the power resides in him, because he's the
power
elected
resides in him
person.
And so, yeah, it's very constitutionally problematic to have others who are not elected, who are not him, who are performing the executive role, not him. Now, there's no way for any of us from the outside. They kept him so shielded and so insulated. No way for us to be able to assess to what degree, like how many hours out of an average day he was on his A game. He was really lucid. There's no way for us to know that. All we know is that in all these clips that we saw, and then anecdotal accounts from individual members talking to him. I remember having one conversation with him on the phone where he was calling to tell me about his decision to re-expand 2 national monuments in Utah. National monuments that together are, I think, larger than 2 Delawares. A short time into the phone conversation, I could tell he was reading from a script. And not only reading from a script, but his voice would start to trail off at the end of each sentence. And so, he was scripted. So
when was that?
I believe this was sometime perhaps in the fall of 2021.
Oh, so right after he got elected.
But I'm not sure. This one could have been in 2022.
That's I mean, I knew because his sister Val was telling other people that he had some kind of neurological impairment during the campaign, during the 2020 campaign. But what's interesting and infuriating and scary is that someone had to write that script for him. So anyone who's writing a script for a boss to perform a phone conversation is obviously fully aware that that guy is impaired. Like, do you have scripts for phone conversations?
Well, occasionally a U.S. senator will have a list of calls to make.
Yeah.
And the senator's staff might say, here's what you ought to cover here.
Totally.
This, and this. But the idea...
Well, I get that, but I mean...
But the idea there is to read that and then say, okay, that's the stuff I'm going to say.
And have a colloquy.
But you don't actually read from a script when you're having a phone conversation with a colleague or a counterpart in the House or something like that, because people can tell. There are all sorts of telltale signs that you're reading. The way we pronounce certain words, the word to in the middle of a sentence, spoken colloquial English, it's going to be more of a tuh than it is a to. You know, there are things like that that can signal I am reading from a script. And if you do that with a colleague or somebody that you have to interact with a lot, it's not going to be a trust building exercise.
Well,
if they
it's
can
totally
tell you
nuts. I mean, but where does that leave us as citizens? Well, you as a senator. I mean, do we have a right to know what the hell is going on with our government? Who's running it? What's going on with Biden? Who knew? For how long? This is a massive charade. It's obvious now. The whole thing is fake. I mean, that's the conclusion that I'm reaching. Don't we have a right to know the details?
Of course we do. Because we should be concerned, because this potentially affects our national security. This certainly affects all kinds of policy decisions. And, you know, one of the problems, of course, is that we've made the federal government as a whole more powerful than it was ever designed or intended to be.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.